And so to tonight's speaker. Born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, Harvard graduate Caroline Randall Williams is an award-winning poet, young adult novelist, and cookbook author, as well as an activist, public intellectual, performance artist, and scholar. She joined the faculty of Vanderbilt University in the fall of 2019 as a writer in residence in medicine, health, and society, while she continues to work and speak to the places where art, business, and scholarship intersect, moving people closer to their best lives and corporations closer to their ideal identities. She has taught in two of the poorest states in the Union, Mississippi and West Virginia, and she has been educated at two of the richest universities on the globe, Harvard and Oxford. Named by Southern Living as one of the 50 people changing the South, the Kaveh Kanem Fellow has been published and featured in multiple journals, essay collections, and news outlets, including the Iowa Review, the Massachusetts Review, Cherry Bomb, Garden and Gun, Essence, and the New York Times. You may have seen her on Morning Joe, or Dr. Oz, or Hardball with Chris Matthews. More likely you've read her. Caroline's first book, The Diary of B.B. Bright, Possible Princess, co-authored with Alice Randall, won the Harlem Book Fair's Phyllis Wheatley Prize and was a finalist for the NAACP Image Award. Her second co-authored volume, Soul Food Love, won the NAACP Image Award and got her invited to speak at the Smithsonian. In 2017, the New York Times published an op-ed she wrote, and it went viral. Her book of poetry, Lucy Negro Redux, earned rave reviews and got optioned to become a ballet, which in turn earned its own rave reviews. Caroline is a catalyst. She makes change possible by bringing art and joy into the room in such a way that the grit of real-life challenge and limits may become eclipsed by analysis, innovation, and skill. So let me hand over to Caroline now for You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument. Caroline.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Steve. I'm so glad to be with everyone this evening. It's an honor and a privilege to share this Penn Museum virtual space with you all. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. It's humbling to be a part of this lecture series, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to lend my voice to a conversation about this terrifically complicated question of not only what to do with monuments, but what makes a monument in the first place. I'm about the business of expanding our notions of what a monument can and ought to be. Now, before I speak more about the monument of this particular moment in history, I'm going to share with you something I know many of you have already read, but which I feel bears revisiting. And in many ways, I wrote this summer's New York Times piece as a testimony to be spoken aloud and engaged with. So I will take the opportunity to perform my part of that exchange now, even as I look forward to hearing from you all later in the evening. I like to think of it as a sort of call and response. You want a Confederate monument? My body is a Confederate monument. I have rape-colored skin. My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. Dead Confederates are honored all over this country, with cartoonish private statues, solemn public monuments, and even in the names of United States Army bases. It fortifies and heartens me to witness the protests against this practice and the growing clamor from serious, nonpartisan public servants to redress it. But there is a difference between rewriting and reframing the past. I say it is not a matter of airbrushing history, but of adding a new perspective. I am a Black Southern woman, and of my immediate white male ancestors, all of them were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow. According to the rule of hypodescent, the social and legal practice of assigning a genetically mixed-race person to the race with less social power, I am the daughter of 2 Black people, the granddaughter of 4 Black people, the great-granddaughter of 8 Black people. Go back one more generation, and it gets less straightforward and more sinister. As far as family history has always told, and as modern DNA testing has allowed me to confirm, I am the descendant of Black women who were domestic servants and white men who raped their help. It is an extraordinary truth of my life that I am biologically more than half white, and yet I have no white people in my genealogy in living memory. No voluntary whiteness. I am more than half white, and none of it was consensual. White Southern men, my ancestors, took what they wanted from women they did not love, over whom they had extraordinary power, and then failed to claim their children. What is a monument but a standing memory, an artifact to make tangible the truth of the past? My body and blood are a tangible truth of the South and its past. The Black people I come from were owned by the white people I come from. The white people I come from fought and died for their lost cause. And I ask you now, who dares to tell me to celebrate them? Who dares to ask me to accept their mounted pedestals? You cannot dismiss me as someone who doesn't understand. You cannot say it wasn't my family members who fought and died. My Blackness does not put me on the other side of anything. It puts me squarely at the heart of the debate. I don't just come from the South. I come from Confederates. I've got rebel gray blue blood coursing my veins. My great-grandfather Will was raised with the knowledge that Edmund Pettus was his father. Pettus, the storied Confederate general, the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, the man for whom Selma's Bloody Sunday Bridge is named. What a monument. So, I am not an outsider who makes these demands. I am a great-great-granddaughter. And here I am called to say that there is much about the South that is precious to me. I do my best teaching and writing here. There is, however, a peculiar model of Southern pride that must now, at long last, be reckoned with. This is not an ignorant pride, but a defiant one. It is a pride that says, our history is rich, our causes are justified, our ancestors lie beyond reproach. It's a pining for greatness, if you will, a wish again for a certain kind of American memory, a monument-worthy memory. But here's the thing. Our ancestors don't deserve your unconditional pride. Yes, I am proud of every one of my Black ancestors who survived slavery. They earned that pride by any decent person's reckoning. But I am not proud of the white ancestors whom I know, by virtue of my very existence, be bad actors. Among the apologists for the Southern cause and for its monuments, there are those who would dismiss the hardships of the past. They imagine a world of benevolent masters and speak with misty eyes of gentility and honor and the land. They deny plantation rape or explain it away or question the degree of frequency with which it occurred. To those people, it is my privilege to say, I am proof. I am proof that whatever else the South might have been, or might believe itself to be, it was and is a space whose prosperity and sense of romance and nostalgia were built upon the grievous exploitation of Black life. The dream version of the Old South never existed. Any manufactured monument to that time, in that place, tells half a truth at best. The ideas and ideals it purports to honor are not real. To those who have embraced these delusions, now is the time to re-examine your position. Either you have been blind to a truth that my body's story forces you to see, or you really do mean to honor the oppressors at the expense of the oppressed. And you must at last acknowledge your emotional investment in a legacy of hate. Either way, I say the monuments of stone and metal, the monuments of cloth and wood, all the man-made monuments must come down. I defy any sentimental Southerner to defend our ancestors to me. I am quite literally made of the reasons to strip them of their laurels. Thank you for listening to that little bit of the talk. And before I move on, I want to say that when I wrote this piece, I used the word monument throughout. And I think that part of what you'll hear moving forward is I'm really grappling with whether or not even to use the word to reference the statues of Confederate soldiers, because I think that so much of how we contemplate this question of monuments has to do with what a monument ought to serve and what a monument ought to commemorate, and what distinguishes a monument from a statue. And I think that there's a great deal in that to do with context and worthiness. And so I'm sort of hesitant to even refer to the statues in the question of my article as monuments any longer, but we'll get there. Because I do love etymology. And one working early definition of the, and forgive my Latin pronunciation, my Latin is entirely an amateur pursuit, but the word monere, which means to remind or to advise or to warn. And so thinking about it that way, I can still sort of accept my calling these objects monuments, if it's to advise or to warn. But I think that we don't use monuments for that purpose anymore. I think we forget about those last two parts, or they've fallen away from our familiar sense of the word as it's used today. I live my life in what I like to call a body politic. Politic with a K. The term came about almost as a joke, thinking about my body as a monument and then the body politic. It came to me tongue in cheek. It came as a bent note, a nudge, but also as a mental paper cut, an unreachable itch. I'm obviously interested, albeit distantly, in the sort of medieval definition of a body politic as the people of a nation, state, or society considered collectively as an organized group of citizens, because of the ways in which my body, my genetic makeup, and my appearance complicate the story of how that is supposed to be understood in America. What is an American body politic? With a C. But I'm more interested in the notion of how my body's story makes me reconsider and reframe the notion of realpolitik with a K, the system of politics or principles based on practical rather than moral or ideological consideration. Because the fact of the matter is that the practical principles of my life are based on what I consider to be the failures of the moral and ideological considerations of the people and ruling structures of this country, the people so often found in monuments. When I wrote that my body was a Confederate monument, I was getting at this point. When I wrote that to chastise my country was to show my love for it, I was getting to that point. Living in my body as a monument, as a part of the American body politic, continually forces me to consider questions through the lens of realpolitik. It's sort of a mutant child of Du Bois's double consciousness, in a way. It's not to see myself twice, but to see the world for what it is, rather than what it says it is, in order to actually survive it. Let me put it another way. One of the worst fights that I ever had with my mother as a girl was when I was first learning to drive. There was a hilly street near my house. Near the top of one of the hills, there was a T intersection with a stop sign for people merging onto the hilly street in question. Driving home one day with my mother in the car, she began telling me to slow down as we approached the intersection. I kept my foot on the gas and blew right past it like I'd always done, calmly telling her that I had the right of way and that the other drivers had a stop sign. She had no interest in this position. She taught me a lesson then that has been profoundly useful to me in context well beyond the specific concerns of that traffic stop and well into the concerns of this talk. Assuming that people will follow the rules and do the right thing when nobody's watching can and will get you killed, erased, subjugated if you don't make necessary preparations and take necessary precautions. Why would I just assume that the person at the stop sign would stop and wait and see me? I might have been right about my right of way, but I could have been right and still dead, as she put it. Expecting America to do what it says about life and liberty and pursuing happiness and justice for all and all that, well, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's the kind of assumption that can and will get you dead or broken in this country if you're just about any kind of other, and you don't operate with and apply some kind of critical realpolitik perspective. I'm writing and thinking and speaking louder and more regularly than I ever have in my life because I think people need to see how this looks in real time. I've lived so much in white spaces in this white body, and I think it's time to, in white spaces in this black body. And I think it's time to talk more about what I've learned from figuring out how to survive it to the degree that I have. Not just about myself, but about certain kinds of American blind spots, and ultimately how we might better give and receive necessary, tough love. I'm writing and thinking and speaking now because after the events of the end of May, the first week of June, I had to do something. I couldn't march because I have asthma. I was afraid of my own ability to breathe because of the myriad of crises that are going on in this country. But I had to do something. I couldn't spend another day wondering, is my whole life going to be defined and framed by these old American limitations? In other words, I've spent my whole life trying to figure out how to survive this. Now here I would like to share with you one of my favorite poems because it speaks to the ways in which a body really can be an essential monument to itself and a testimony of survival, by the brilliant Lucille Clifton. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Lucille Clifton made her life a monument. In the poem, she invites us to see her as a sculptor of a secularly sacred art, her kind of life. Now, in the spirit of celebrating those who came before them by emulating them, I'm going to take a moment to put on my own poet's hat briefly and invite you all to be the first to hear the beginning of a longer form prose poem inspired by this conversation and hopefully going to be a part of my next book. When I wrote that my body was a monument, that was only the beginning of the thought. The body does so much work past the work, so much telling past the shape of the thing. My body has been a bent note, a sound made for the blues. My body has been a sharp knife made for fear and polish and blood and good steak. She is also a whole book, an artifact, a mirror, an instrument, a weapon, a frame, a window, a pipe, a funnel, an altar, a vehicle, a platonic ideal and a veil, and a cave and a capo and all 6 guitar strings together. What if I told you that everybody is a living document, a text to be read by the world, a text you write on, revise, reread, redress, a text that the world reads and misreads, handles and mishandles. So yeah, the body. She's a monument. She's a document. She's a declaration of freedom or peace or war. What else? It's easy to imagine the body a weapon. But what kind of weapon? Is a bridge a finished weapon or a tool? A resource? An asset? Am I a bridge? Been one before. Am I still? Do you stay all of the things you've been once you've been them? As I'm sure you understand by now, I am terrifically moved to be speaking to you all this evening. In an echo of my article, I am the daughter of one Army guy, the granddaughter of 2 Army guys, and the great-great-granddaughter of a man who escaped slavery to join the Union forces and remained wearing the cloth of the nation long after the end of the war. Put another way, the only men in my family I've known alive, my father and 2 grandfathers, chose to serve their country. In other words, I've got a terrific respect and admiration for this place, for serving it, for celebrating it. This is something that I spoke to in my follow-up Times piece. Again, I'm really wanting to use this time, this intellectual and historical space, to hammer out some home truths about what's going on as I understand it. It's American stories and how we are to memorialize them. And it surprises people to learn of what I see as my unabashed, fairly old-fashioned patriotism in this context. I don't fit an obvious mold, but I think that's part of the failure of imagination, the failure of empathy in our national discourse these days. Why on earth can I not, in contemplating this place, in this moment, speak out against its ills with one stroke of a pen and then with unreserved gratitude celebrate the infinite promise that is the idea of America? Now, we're going to go down a little rabbit hole of a history lesson about how I got into this monumental body. Because asking that question moves me to introduce you to my grandfather, Avon N. Williams, Jr., a monumental man. He was the first Black man to be elected to the Tennessee Senate since Reconstruction. He was Thurgood Marshall's first cousin. He was a civil rights attorney, a veteran, and a good and loving man. In 1964, he was interviewed at length by great American writer Robert Penn Warren, who was trying to chronicle the Black American experience through a project entitled Who Speaks for the Negro? My grandfather had some complicated but important things to say in that exchange, and I'm going to challenge us all by sharing some of them here. Mr. Warren asked, "Were you in the war, Happy World War II?" My grandfather replied, "I was. I was drafted in 1943, February of 1943, the 9th of February, as a matter of fact, and I was separated in August 1946, approximately 2.5 years overseas." Did the war experience, as it did in so many other people, have some effect on you? Asked Mr. Warren. In your attitude toward the civil rights situation? Was it fixed beforehand, or did it become fixed afterward in developing part of your convictions and career? Grandfather replied, "I would like to say that anyone born in the South and reared in the South would have any Negro with any powers of perception at all would have to have some rather fixed attitudes long before the age they went into the Army, which was 21 years of age. I would say, however, that some of my attitudes were intensified by reason of the experience in the Army, in a segregated Army, and in some instances in places where the discrimination was just rather open and vicious. In addition to being discrimination in terms of a segregated organization, units and that sort of thing, such as PXs and certain other types of discrimination, that sort of thing, yes, I would say service in the armed forces did intensify some of the attitudes that I had already developed as a result of my experience as a Southerner. Let's not avoid. Let's navigate. We are dynamic people. We can stand for two things to be true at once. My grandfather returned to the Army and remained a reservist until retiring at the rank of lieutenant colonel. That was after returning from 2.5 years in the Pacific Theater to a segregated South where he still had to sit on the back of the bus and drink from separate water fountains. And he spoke this 4 years before the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross in his front yard, but that's another story. He could say these things about his experience and still return to the institution where he experienced them, not because he thought that America was perfect, or that all of our monuments made sense, or that the place was even operationally just, but because he believed in an idea, and he believed the virtues of the fundamental human condition, and he believed in a capacity for change. Later in the interview, he got even realer. Part of the fear of desegregation, of integration, Mr. Penn Warren posited, was that it was hard to believe that Black Americans could really love people who just days, months, generations before been willing to engage in a system that stripped them of their rights, dignities, humanities. And it is a tall order, the notion of choosing to share space with those who have harmed you, or looked away while you were being harmed, or even who voted for someone who was willing to see you wrong done by. My grandfather had an interesting response to that question. He said, "I really didn't say what I should have said about this matter of loving those who hate you. I think many of us misconceive what loving those who can hate you means. Loving does not mean what the white man has traditionally thought it meant. It does not mean being blind to faults. It does not mean being afraid to tell him when he is wrong or when he's being stupid. It does not mean being afraid to fight him in a legitimate way. The love that I'm talking about is the type of love which a very intelligent Christian has for a child. After all, as I see it, although the white man has accused the Negro of being a child in the American society, I think that if you look at it realistically, you will find that the white American has displayed the more childish tendencies, that it is he who has failed to accept the responsibilities of a mature man. Take, for instance, his violation of the Negro slave woman, a completely unrestrained and childish impulse that completely ignored the mature recognition of the facts of life or any insight into the future. The Negro woman, on the other hand, I think, although she was unable to help herself, I think history teaches that she has come off far better in terms of demonstrating a maturity, a recognition of the responsibilities of life to herself and to her children. The fact that we have so many Negro men who now have gone so far in life is the result of some Negro mother washing and ironing and working hard to get that child into school and gain an advantage for him. So I say that love involves chastity. And I think that the white American needs a whole lot of chastisement. It involves other forms of correction. It involves a whole lot of things that we don't think about when we talk. Love involves chastisement. I love the promise of America. I love the idea of a place that is free and equal, but we are not there yet. Anytime you have to catch yourself telling someone what their truth is, rather than using empathy to try and understand their position through their eyes, you really ought to have a second thought about your approach. You can love your country and want to see it change too. Now, I'm no legal scholar, but I can read. I'm thinking about Article 5 of the Constitution, which, if you're not familiar with, I will share with you. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. Or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. They knew we might need to change something. That means coming to the table to hear where needs are and aren't being met. It means loving reproach. Perhaps our loving reproach in this moment even involves some redefining of terms. What, for example, makes a difference between a monument and a statue? As I've said, it's nothing but perspective. We need a perspective adjustment that allows us to continue to evolve into the kind of body politic, with a C, that we have the potential to be. Monuments become monuments based on the significance ascribed to them. Implicit in that idea is the idea that there's an inherent value in what the monument represents as it's represented. When we resist tearing one down, we are reifying the inherent worthiness of its being erected at the start. I think we have to start thinking about broadening what we choose, identifying the monuments that are not there. To me, they speak louder than the ones that remain. What it really comes down to among us here tonight is that we are all so lucky to be living through a history-making moment of this magnitude. Ultimately, what I'm really wanting to think about now is who and what will the monuments remember from these coming days and months and years? How will we honor the great potential of this American experiment, show the world a united face with the will, the fortitude, and the good faith to be a beacon beyond the Founding Fathers' wildest dreams? I want to end this talk with something I rarely indulge in, a moment of optimism. I'm inviting you all today to ask yourselves, seriously, how to be real American dreamers. Under normal circumstances, the charge I'm about to give would seem a bit overblown, perhaps a bit vainglorious even, but there's never been a time like this. Not in these United States, not really. So I say to you, look backward, but don't stay looking backward. Don't get stuck in old grievances or spend your time figuring out only how to polish old stuff. Figure out how to be worthy of the monuments we'll build next. Thank you.